So the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, recently announced so-called tax cuts for individuals and business. But you know what? There's so much dishonesty in this. There's two major issues in these new policy announcements. First, we can say that the tax cuts themselves are meaningful. Everyone who pays national insurance will pay a bit less, and businesses can get more generous tax relief on investments. However, overall, the tax collected by the government will actually be increased. There isn't a tax cut, there's a tax increase. The tax increase comes about because in 2021, the government froze the income tax thresholds until 2028. This means that the income threshold at which people pay tax has stayed the same, while high inflation has meant that wage rises are moving many people into the next tax bracket. It may well be that for some individuals they do pay less tax as a result of the national insurance cut, but on average, more tax will be paid, and many people will be paying substantially more tax as a result of going into the 40% tax bracket. Overall, although the tax cuts will reduce tax compared to what it would have been, the amount of tax collected will still significantly increase over the next 5 years. This chart shows the amount of tax that the government collects as a percentage of GDP. The red dotted line shows what the forecast tax revenue would have been in the absence of the tax cut. The blue dotted line shows the forecast including the tax cuts announced in the Chancellor's autumn statement. As you can see, tax revenue is still expected to keep increasing. There isn't a tax cut. The best you can say is that there is a bit less of a tax increase. So that's the first dishonesty. The second thing is that the Chancellor wasn't honest about the implications of the way in which he's financing these tax cuts. Because inflation has been higher than previously forecasted, this has meant that the government will actually collect more tax. This is partly due to the frozen tax thresholds as mentioned earlier. However, it's also because higher prices means more VAT is collected, and higher wages means more income tax is collected generally. So inflation has given the Chancellor a bit of extra tax revenue that wasn't anticipated, and he's using this for these tax reductions. However, because of the inflation, public expenditure will also be higher than previously forecast. But Hunt isn't going to increase expenditure to cover the increased public spending costs. This means that public spending will be significantly cut in real terms. The yellow line shows the forecast changes in government expenditure based on the March 2023 forecasts. These figures net out the effect of inflation, i.e. this is real spending. However, since then, the inflation forecast for the coming years has increased, which is what has given the extra tax revenue. This means that instead of increasing as the yellow line shows, based on the higher expected inflation, the blue solid line shows that there'll be reductions in government spending each year in the medium term. The official calculations show that the effective reduction in public spending is £19 billion. This is more or less the amount of the tax cuts. So if Hunt hadn't reduced taxes, he could have kept government spending at the same level, taking into account inflation. Instead, future governments are going to have to find £19 billion worth of cuts. In response to being challenged about this, he said that, as a Conservative, I believe lower taxes are how we grow the economy. The argument here would be that if his policies create significant economic growth, that will bring in more tax revenue, which will allow for more public spending. The problem is that growth won't compensate for these reductions in public spending. The expected growth from Hunt's latest policy initiatives is already factored into the calculations, and growth is going to be very modest. The official forecasts show that growth won't dramatically improve for the foreseeable future. Here are the official UK growth forecasts. Growth is expected to be 0.6% in 2023 and only 0.7% in 2024. Although this is better than previously forecast, it's still quite modest. Normal growth would be expected to be in the region of 2% to 3%. Average UK growth in the post-war period has been around 2.6%. For the medium term, it can be seen that growth isn't expected to be above 2%. So the second dishonesty is around the fact that there will have to be significant real cuts in public spending over the next 5 years. Of course, it's unlikely the Tories will be in power, so what the Chancellor has done is to leave this problem for the Labour Party. Currently, Labour aren't proposing to increase spending very much and have only proposed modest tax increases. Thus, either Labour will have to increase tax significantly or it'll have to impose more austerity. The Tories present themselves as being the party of responsible fiscal management. This pretend tax cut is both irresponsible and dishonest. And terrible news for the UK economy, for NHS waiting lists, for poverty, for upgrading school buildings, for the broken rail system, etc., etc. It's absolutely crazy to be cutting real spending even further. As I always say, we need to be dramatically increasing spending to provide proper solutions to the sad state of our country. And this inevitably involves a tax rise. I've set out how this is possible without most people paying more tax in other videos. If we want state-of-the-art public services, and I think that most people in the UK do, we have to pay for them. And we can only do this with some kind of tax on the massive wealth that exists in the UK. All political parties protect the wealthy against paying their fair share towards a more functioning and just country. We need to change this now. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.